Greetings, my name is Clara, and I'm 22 years old. You might wonder how a young woman like me ended up living with her uncle, especially considering the circumstances I'm about to describe. But believe me, this wasn't a scenario I ever imagined either. I'm pursuing a career in graphic design, dedicating most of my time to drawing, designing, and taking on freelance projects. Life hasn't always been easy since my parents divorced during my childhood. I often moved around in search of stability, and eventually, I found myself staying with my Uncle Samuel. This move was unexpected, to say the least. The events unfolded when my mother relocated for work, and I had no choice but to look for accommodation while finishing my college studies. Samuel, my uncle, was the only family member able to offer me a place to stay. He's been married to his wife, Eleanor, for several years, and they live in a beautiful home in a quiet rural area, far from the hustle and bustle of the city. I assumed the move would be like the others, peaceful, calm, and easy to adjust to, but reality turned out to be quite different from what I had expected. This brings me to where I am today. Several months have passed since I moved in, and by now, I've mostly settled into this new environment. I thought I had adapted to the peace and quiet here, but today feels different. I'm writing this because something happened earlier, something that began when I walked into Samuel's room while he was asleep. Before I continue with the story, please be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay updated on what comes next. First, let me give you some background on Uncle Samuel. He's far more than just a typical uncle. Throughout my upbringing, he was more of a mentor than a simple family figure. He taught me how to ride a bike, helped me with home repairs, and even gave me my first car for my 18th birthday. So, when my mother needed a place to stay for her business trip, Samuel was the obvious choice. He's not like the usual uncle who only appears during holidays. While Samuel is kind, patient, and exceptional, moving in with him and Eleanor was a big adjustment. They've been together for a long time, having married 2 years ago. At first, I had some reservations about Eleanor. She was older than Samuel, and there was a certain coldness in her demeanor that always kept me at a distance, making me feel like an outsider in their personal space. Initially, I stayed in the guest room, located at the far end of their house. I tried to minimize my presence, giving them their privacy. Still, the tension between Eleanor and me gradually eased, particularly when she began offering me advice on cooking, cleaning, and other domestic tasks. My relationship with her wasn't as easygoing as with Samuel, but the tension did lessen over time, and life started to feel more normal again. In the past few months, my bond with Samuel has grown stronger. His presence has become a source of comfort. He listens to me without judgment and is always willing to help. We often spend our evenings together, chatting over dinner or relaxing in the living room. Recently, however, I've noticed an inexplicable shift in our dynamic. What started as a fleeting feeling has slowly deepened as we've spent more time together, leading me to recognize an inappropriate attraction toward him. His smiles, the occasional brush of his hand against mine, and the fleeting glances he gives me when he thinks I'm not looking. All of these interactions felt different from anything we've shared before. It's hard to explain, but I couldn't ignore it. I wasn't sure if he felt it too, but I sensed an undeniable tension building between us, an invisible force pulling us closer. I know you might be thinking, Clara, what are you saying? He's your uncle. I understand how absurd that sounds. Yet this feeling, this undeniable pull, hasn't gone away. I try to convince myself that it's just in my head, but whenever we're alone together, the atmosphere feels heavier, as if something unspoken is drawing us closer. This brings me to the present moment. After dinner, while I was working on a project in my room, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Samuel had been asleep for several hours, and Eleanor was out with friends, leaving just the two of us alone for the evening. At first, I brushed it off, but then I heard the door to his bedroom creak open and I froze. For a brief moment, I hesitated. Should I go in? Should I let him rest? But my curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to talk to him. Perhaps it was the silent tension between us that called me toward him. I quietly opened the door, trying not to disturb him. He was lying on his back, one arm resting behind his head, his face calm and peaceful in sleep. The soft light from the window cast gentle shadows across his face, giving him a serene, almost ethereal quality. I stood there for several moments, my heart pounding. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, and my cheeks felt hot with an unfamiliar warmth. I had never felt this way before. I wasn't sure what I was feeling. Maybe it was just a desire to observe him, or perhaps I was hoping for something more. I didn't know how long I stood there, lost in my thoughts, until my contemplation was interrupted when I accidentally knocked a small vase off the shelf behind his bed. The noise startled Jonathan, and he woke with a slight jolt. His eyelids fluttered open, and for a brief moment our eyes met. I saw the confusion in his gaze, but there was something else there, something I couldn't quite place. He blinked several times, trying to focus on me, before letting out a soft, groggy laugh. "Clara, what are you doing in here?" he asked, his voice still thick with sleep. My heart was racing in my chest, and I struggled to find the right words. I didn't want to come across as intrusive, but I wasn't sure how to explain my presence. My mouth went dry, and nothing coherent came to mind. I? I didn't mean to disturb your sleep," I stammered, suddenly embarrassed. Jonathan slowly sat up, rubbing his eyes, and gave me a soft smile, the kind he usually reserved for moments of patience. But this time, there was something different about it, a subtle intensity in his eyes that made my heart race even faster. He studied me for a moment before speaking again. "It's fine," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "Clara, you're always welcome to talk to me. I'm here if you need anything." I nodded, but my thoughts were a jumbled mess. I didn't know how to handle the emotions churning inside me. The air in the room felt thick, and I could feel my breathing quicken. "I just wanted to talk," I whispered, my voice barely audible. Jonathan's smile faltered for a second, and I caught a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. But it disappeared almost as quickly as it came. "Come sit with me," he said, his tone warm and inviting. "You can always talk to me." I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do, but something inside me urged me forward. Without thinking any further, I approached and sat down next to him on the bed. The tension between us was palpable, more intense than it had ever been. I could feel the warmth of his body close to mine, and the faint scent of his cologne filled the air. We were so close now that I could hear his breathing, feel the rise and fall of his chest with each breath. My heart raced again, and before I knew it, I found myself looking up at him. Our faces were so near that I could feel the heat of his skin, and his gaze was soft, almost hesitant. But there was something else in it, something that made my skin prickle with a strange, electric sensation. His voice was lower now, almost a whisper, before I could even respond. And without thinking, I moved closer, my lips separating instinctively. My blood rushed to my face, and my heartbeat seemed unbearably loud in my ears. What was I doing? What was happening between us? I couldn't put it into words, but everything felt so intense, like an undeniable energy hung in the air between us. Jonathan didn't move, his eyes searching mine with an intensity that mirrored the confusion swirling inside me. He remained silent, yet I could feel his breath quickening, matching the rhythm of mine. The room suddenly seemed warmer, the quiet between us heavy with unspoken emotions. My thoughts were in disarray, and everything that had happened until now led up to this unpredictable, inexplicable moment. I found it increasingly difficult to control myself. I leaned in, my lips trembling as they brushed against his. His lips met mine with tenderness, unleashing a flood of emotions. My mind screamed for me to pull away, but my body refused. I needed this. I wanted this. Yet I couldn't quite grasp it. "Stop," my inner voice urged. Daniel's gentle but firm hand cradled my cheek, pulling me closer. His other hand rested on the bed, his fingers grazing my skin. I could feel the warmth of his touch, a sensation that set my skin alight. The kiss deepened, erasing the boundary between his lips and mine. Outside the room, everything else vanished. Only the two of us existed. We were caught in a bond that felt inescapable. My thoughts clouded with confusion, guilt, and an overpowering sense of righteousness. What were we doing? What did it all mean? A deep, wordless need surged within me, one that made no sense and had no justification. He broke the kiss briefly, resting his forehead against mine. Our breathing was erratic, labored, and each exhale seemed measured. I could feel his pulse against my skin, in sync with my own heartbeat. "Avery," he whispered softly, his voice thick with emotion. "We shouldn't go further." But I wasn't sure if I agreed. A force inside me urged me to ignore any reason, to surrender to the feeling. Slowly, I reached for his hand, intertwining my fingers with his. He didn't pull away. Instead, his fingers tightened around mine, holding on as desperately as I clung to him. Our eyes met again, and we were enveloped in silence. The weight of everything between us, the unspoken question that hung in the air, should we? I didn't give myself time to think. My hand moved to the back of his neck, pulling him closer, kissing him again. This time, there was no hesitation, no fear, no uncertainty, only the need to be close to him, to feel him. Daniel's hand slid down my back, bringing me closer, the contact of our bodies intensifying the sensation. I didn't know where we were going, but it didn't matter. The moment was all that existed, and all that I wanted. My heart raced, pounding against my chest as his lips traveled down to my neck, placing soft kisses along my skin. His breath was warm against my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. It was an unfamiliar, intimate sensation, overwhelming, consuming, and, in the most thrilling way, wrong. Are you sure about this? He whispered against my skin, his voice heavy with desire. I do not wish to harm you, I whispered, closing my eyes in an attempt to collect my thoughts. Every part of me screamed to pull away, but I could not resist. The yearning was too overwhelming, the need too powerful. I wanted to cast aside all rationality, desiring only to be with him. I am certain, I murmured softly, my hands gliding over his chest, feeling the warmth of his skin beneath my fingertips. I want this, Jonathan. I want you. His lips found mine again, and this kiss was deeper, more urgent. There was no turning back now. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the overwhelming sensation of desire and need, a rush of energy unlike anything I had ever felt before. The room felt smaller, the light dimming, as the depth of our connection intensified. Each touch, each kiss, communicated a bond that went far beyond anything we could understand, a depth we were both eager to explore. I could feel his heartbeat, steady and reassuring, syncing with mine. Though a part of me resisted the reality of the situation, a much larger part surrendered completely. What had started as a kiss had evolved into something greater, something beyond words, a connection that transcended verbal expression, beyond anything that could be explained. I've wanted this for so long, Jonathan whispered gently, his breath warm against my lips. I struggled to make sense of his words as my hands roamed over his body, tracing the muscles in his chest, the warmth of his skin, and his responses to my touch. But there was no turning back. There was an undeniable attraction between us, a magnetism that made time seem irrelevant as we lost ourselves in each other. In the serene cadence of our kisses and the warmth of our caresses, everything finally felt right. In the stillness of the room, we were no longer just uncle and niece. We had become two individuals, bound by something far deeper than anything I had ever experienced. The atmosphere between Jonathan and me was thick with tension, and neither of us moved or spoke. The sudden sound of the front door opening downstairs broke the silence, causing both of us to freeze. My heart raced, and in a panic, I pulled away from Jonathan, my mind reeling. What had we just done? What had just happened between us? Shame washed over me, but it was entwined with a deep, undeniable need that I couldn't shake. Jonathan stayed motionless at first, the tension between us and the complicated reality of what had just unfolded making it difficult for either of us to move. He fixed his gaze on me, his face unreadable. I could still feel the warmth between us, the intimacy that had not yet faded. "Leah," Jonathan muttered, his voice strained. But before he could say anything further, footsteps echoed up the stairs, and a voice called out, "Jonathan?" My heart sank into my stomach. It was Beatrice. Without thinking, I quickly pulled away from the bed, my breath coming in shallow, rapid gasps. I wasn't sure what to do next. My thoughts were racing in every direction. I struggled to form a coherent response, my mind racing with the need to confront her after everything that had just occurred. The door to Jonathan's room creaked open, revealing Beatrice standing in the doorway, her expression one of surprise. Her gaze flickered between Jonathan and me, confusion and disbelief evident on her face as she tried to make sense of the situation. "Leah, Jonathan, what is going on here?" she asked, her tone laden with doubt, but there was something more beneath it, a sense that something was terribly wrong. I felt the blood drain from my face at her presence. Beatrice's sudden appearance felt like an icy deluge sweeping over me. Everything that had just happened between Jonathan and me now seemed impossible to explain, to rationalize. My throat tightened, and I struggled to find my voice, faltering as I searched for a response. I was lost, unsure how to explain anything to her. Jonathan, seated on the bed with a distant look in his eyes, seemed just as confused as I was. He ran a hand nervously over the back of his neck, clearly ashamed, yet equally uncertain how to articulate his thoughts. Whether Beatrice's eyes were on him or me, there was a wordless understanding between us, something neither of us was ready to confront in that moment. Everything shifted. Beatrice, though clearly sensing that something had happened between us, didn't react with anger or disappointment as I might have expected. Instead, a deep, unsettling sorrow reflected in her eyes. It was a sorrow that seemed to speak of something far greater, something unknown. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her, her presence taking up space as if it had always belonged there. There was an unusual stillness in the air now, an eerie calm that felt like the quiet before a storm. "Leah," Beatrice spoke softly, her voice unexpectedly gentle, "you need to understand something. This is more complicated than you realize, more than any of you grasp." I watched her, overwhelmed with confusion. What did she mean? What else was there to know? The silence between us grew heavier after her words. The weight of her statement lingered, and though we were still lost in a fog of bewilderment, there was a sense that Beatrice wasn't angry with us. She wasn't rejecting us. She was offering us something, an opportunity, though what that truly meant, I wasn't sure. Jonathan remained seated, his expression a mix of regret, uncertainty, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. He avoided my gaze, his hands nervously rubbing together. I understood that he, too, was burdened by what had just happened between us. But upon further reflection, I realized none of this had been planned. It had happened beyond our control, and the only certainty now was that we couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. Beatrice was right about that. The confusion and the emotions we were experiencing couldn't be ignored. They had to be faced and dealt with, or else they would consume us. "Jonathan," I murmured, my voice trembling slightly, "what do we do now?" Jonathan lifted his eyes, his gaze filled with emotions I couldn't fully understand. "I don't know, Leah," he said softly. "I don't know." I was lost in a sea of uncertainty, unsure of what emotions I was supposed to feel, anger, humiliation, or whether I was even allowed to feel anything at all. Jonathan's voice trembled, revealing the deep conflict within him. He was a man torn between the undeniable bond we had forged and his sense of duty to his wife, my aunt, and the legacy he felt he needed to leave behind. This wasn't something we could resolve in one conversation. The situation was far from simple. I took a deep breath and moved toward him. The space between us seemed to close as I approached. I wanted to reach out, to embrace him, though I wasn't sure if it was the right thing to do. Everything about this felt uncertain, and I didn't know what was right anymore. "I don't think we can solve everything right now," I said softly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "But we need to have an honest conversation. This is too complicated to ignore." Gradually, his demeanor shifted, still serious, but not hostile. "I understand," he said quietly, "but I'm not sure where to begin." I moved closer, my heart racing, but my voice remained composed. "We begin by acknowledging what happened, what we feel, and what we still feel, and then we figure out what comes next." Jonathan nodded, his expression softening slightly. "This won't be easy, Leah, but I want to understand what's happening between us." I took his hand, the contact both comforting and filled with unspoken emotions. "I don't have all the answers, Jonathan. I don't know what comes next, but I can't keep avoiding this anymore." We sat in silence for a moment, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to make sense of the tangled mess we had found ourselves in. There was no clear path forward, no guide to navigate the labyrinth of emotions, regret, and uncertainty that surrounded us. But in that moment, Beatrice had given us something, an opportunity, a chance to face this together, to confront the complexity of what had happened, and to sort through the web of feelings that had ensnared us. I looked at Jonathan again, our eyes meeting, and in that instant, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it with honesty. There was no perfect solution, no easy way out, but there was the potential for healing, understanding, and maybe something even greater than we had before. My mind swirled with possibilities as I leaned back. Beatrice's calm, parental guidance came to mind. She had shown us a door we hadn't known existed. She hadn't rejected us, hadn't condemned us. Instead, she had given us the space to explore the complexities of what had happened. But what would come next? What would Beatrice think if we admitted the depth of our feelings? If we told her how much this all still affected us, would it be too much? Could she ever truly forgive us? But those were questions for another time. For now, it was just Jonathan and me sitting together in the silence of our shared uncertainty. We knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. There was no turning back. All we could do now was move forward, step by step, whatever that meant. And together, we would find a way to make sense of it all.